Let's bring in MS Now reporter Nnamdi Egwuonwu live from Minneapolis, MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone-Lopez, and former Chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for the District of Columbia, Donell Harvin. Nnamdi, what's the latest on the investigation into this new shooting? And take us through what you saw last night following this new ICE-involved shooting.
Yeah, Anna, according to the Department of Homeland Security, we know that the Venezuelan immigrant that was at that ICE was intending to apprehend was taken to the hospital to be treated for his wounds and is now in custody. We know that 2 additional suspects that were involved in that scuffle are also now in custody. And as far as what we saw last night, we were here when all of this was going down, as we saw crowds continue to form and get into increasingly volatile clashes with federal law enforcement and also local PD that initially responded to some of these reports. I want to show you the road here because it tells a lot of the story of how violent that clash was. All of these white marks you see here, those are remnants of pepper balls. And as you see, they are all over this street. Just standing here now, I can tell you that the tear gas is still incredibly pungent. We smell it. We're also still fighting debris like this. This is what's called a blast ball. And it was used last night. What it does, essentially, when it's thrown by federal agents, it creates a loud bang sound. It also creates a flash of light. And also, it has rubber pellets that then just spread and hit everyone nearby. So the fact that we're still fighting this after cleaning crews came on the scene, after we saw volunteers this morning come and pick stuff up, this gives you a picture of just how volatile things were and the amount of non-lethal resources that these agents had to use to try to contain this crowd. All of this comes, as we've heard from Governor Walz and Mayor Frey, warning that violent protests like we saw last night could incite the federal government to have even more of a response here, which of course would continue to upset many of the protesters we spoke to. I want to play for you comments from Mayor Frey last night, and I want you to hear the warning he's issuing to residents of the city.
For anyone that is taking the bait tonight, stop. That is not helpful. Go home. We cannot counter Donald Trump's chaos with our own brand of chaos. And I have seen thousands of people throughout our city peacefully protesting. For those that have peacefully protested, I applaud you. For those that are taking the bait, you are not helping, and you are not helping the undocumented immigrants in our city.
Anna, we will tell you that in the immediate aftermath of that shooting last night, we are already hearing from organizers that more mass demonstrations could be on the way as anger continues over the presence of these federal personnel in the city.
Nnamdi Egwuonwu, thank you so much for that reporting. Laura, President Trump posted this morning about using the Insurrection Act. What exactly is he saying?
That's right, Anna. This is certainly not the first time the president has threatened to use the Insurrection Act, but he is again now, maybe more forcefully than he ever has before, is threatening to use it. He posted on Truth Social this morning that if the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE, who are only there to do their job, the president says, quote, I will institute the Insurrection Act. And he talks about how other presidents have done so before. Just to note, Anna, the last time the Insurrection Act was invoked was in 1992 during the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. And the last time it was invoked over the objections of a governor who didn't want this to be invoked to send in the military was in the 1960s. Now, again, as I said, this is something the president has threatened going back all the way to his first term. He wanted to do it during the 2020 George Floyd protests. There was talk from MAGA figures about doing it after the 2020 election when they wanted to keep Trump unlawfully in power. But this is something that the president and Stephen Miller have also threatened as recently as last fall, repeatedly talking about wanting to potentially do this if they were blocked by the courts and the actions, if they felt like they were resisted on the ground by local leaders. And you see that the president has ratcheted up his rhetoric, calling Americans who are protesting, quote, domestic terrorists, and saying that he wants to invoke this to be able to put military and more forces on the ground of an American city. And the Insurrection Act really does give him the power to do that. There's very limitations on what he's able to call an insurrection. So if he decides he wants to do this, it may very well be challenged in courts. But according to legal experts I've talked to, he has wide parameter here to invoke the Insurrection Act.
Danelle, after what we saw take place last night and in recent days, what are your observations? Is what we're seeing from these federal immigration agents actually making the city safer?
Well, if you speak to the Trump administration, they say that they're trying to bring the city to a safer place. I will tell you from the local perspective that this chaos is unfolding because you have a collision course between the administration, state and local officials, and the population there. They don't want ICE there. Quite frankly, I think that when you put more ICE agents into a volatile situation like this, it only can turn out like it turned out last night. ICE and federal authorities aren't trained to de-escalate. They're not trained in civil disturbance. That's the state and locals' job. Unfortunately, however, the state and locals aren't collaborating, and there's no trust between the state and locals and federal officials. So they're not going to have law enforcement out there that is trained in how to de-escalate and how to treat civil disturbance in a humane way. And so what you see, the images that you're showing right now, is what's going to play out probably in the days to come.
And not to mention that the local law enforcement is way outmatched compared to the sheer number of federal agents sent in. Based on what we're hearing from the mayor, it's 600 local law enforcement to some 3,000 federal agents. Danelle, we have such little information about this latest shooting. Again, the narrative of what happens all coming really from DHS, which unwaveringly defends its agents. It condemns the actions of pretty much anyone they come in conflict with. Right now, a lot of Americans don't trust the information coming from the federal government. Remember, even a federal judge in Chicago questioned if Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bavino was telling the truth about use of force by agents in that city, calling statements simply not credible. How concerning is this growing distrust and not being able to believe what the administration is saying in an encounter like this?
It's extremely concerning. And from a Homeland Security perspective, I find that we're on a precipice of truth versus non-truth. So if you take the current DHS Secretary, Kristi Noem, at her word, the ICE agent that shot Ms. Good was following his training, his tactics, and policies. If that's the case and you take her at her word, then we have a big problem, because what we have is ICE agents that are not practicing proper police or law enforcement officer safety and survivability. I went to the police academy. I actually reached out to my old sergeant. I said, we never were trained to stand in front of a moving vehicle or a vehicle with an occupied person. That is what they call the kill zone. They call it the kill zone because officers can get killed standing in front of a car. You're taught to approach from the rear or the front of the car. So with that said, if you take Kristi Noem at her word and ICE officers are being trained to do that, then we have a problem with ICE officers potentially getting hurt or killed or having to do that to somebody else. The last thing I'll say is that that was a 10-year veteran that was involved in that incident last week. We have ICE agents that are rolling off the assembly line, so to speak, with far, far less training. News reporting consists of 47 days of training for these new ICE officers. I will tell you that in many states, you can become an animal control officer, but you need twice as much training. So think about that. Your local dog catcher will need more training to carry a firearm and execute warrants and arrest people than an ICE agent. And that's what's concerning.
Danelle Harvin, Laura Barone Lopez, thank you both.